I'm Zoe Martin, 28 years old, and 3 months ago, my entire world shattered when my dad collapsed during his morning jog in Riverside Park. The paramedics said his heart stopped for 4 minutes, and all I could think about was getting to him, being there, doing whatever I could with my medical training to help. But what my mother and siblings did next was even worse than watching him fight for his life in that sterile ICU. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, who somehow becomes the family savior when it's convenient, please let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join others who understand this particular brand of conditional love. I met Daniel 6 years ago at a coffee roaster in Portland's Pearl District, not one of those chain places but a converted warehouse, where they actually roasted beans on site, and the smell of Colombian single origin hung in the air like incense. I was hunched over my laptop at a reclaimed wood table, frantically reviewing pharmacology notes for my third-year medical school exams, when this guy with paint-stained fingers and genuinely kind eyes asked if I minded him sharing the outlet. He was working on architectural sketches for a community garden project, these beautiful hand-drawn plans that looked more like art than blueprints. We ended up talking for 4 hours about how healing spaces should feel organic, how hospitals could learn from gardens, how both of us were trying to build something meaningful with our lives. He bought me a lavender honey latte, and when I told him I was studying to be a doctor, he didn't immediately launch into stories about his mysterious back pain or ask me to look at some weird mole. Instead, he asked what kind of medicine made my heart race with possibility. I told him emergency medicine, how I loved the puzzle solving under pressure, the way you could literally pull someone back from the edge. He smiled and said that sounded like the most important job in the world, and I remember thinking this was the first person who understood that medicine wasn't just my career choice, but my calling. Those first 5 years together felt like building something beautiful from nothing, the way Daniel approached his architectural projects. We moved in together after 8 months, a tiny apartment above a vintage bookstore where the floorboards creaked symphonies and the radiator clanged out rhythm sections all winter long. Daniel would wake up early to make me coffee in this ancient French press his grandmother had given him, and he'd leave little notes in my med school textbooks, usually terrible medical puns that made me groan and smile simultaneously. During my surgical rotations, when I'd come home exhausted and covered in that particular hospital smell of disinfectant and desperation, he'd already have dinner ready, usually something simple but nourishing like his famous vegetable curry with homemade naan. We developed this ritual where I'd tell him about my day while he massaged the tension out of my shoulders, and he'd share his latest project challenges, while I helped him think through design problems. His firm landed a contract to design a new pediatric wing for Providence Hospital, and I'd find him at midnight sketching child height water fountains and reading research about how natural light affects healing rates. We talked about our future constantly, how we'd build a life that mattered, maybe travel to rural areas where medical care was scarce, how he could design clinics that didn't feel like prisons. Sunday mornings meant farmers market runs, where we'd buy ingredients for elaborate brunches, then spend hours cooking together while jazz played from his vintage turntable. I'd quiz him on medical terminology while he taught me about load-bearing walls and the golden ratio, and somehow those conversations felt like the foundation of something permanent. The golden period arrived during my residency, when everything finally clicked into place like puzzle pieces finding their perfect fit. I was working at OHSU's emergency department, finally doing the work I'd dreamed about since college, and Daniel's firm had grown enough that he could be selective about projects, focusing on sustainable healthcare design. Our typical day started at 5:30 with coffee and meditation on our apartment balcony, watching the sun rise over Mount Hood while Daniel sketched ideas and I reviewed patient cases from the night before. I'd get to the hospital by 7, spend 12 hours immersed in the controlled chaos of emergency medicine, making decisions that mattered, feeling useful in a way that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Daniel would pick me up after my shifts, and we'd drive home with NPR playing softly, his hand holding mine while I processed the day's intensity. Evenings meant cooking together, sharing stories, planning our future with the confidence of people who'd found their stride. We talked about marriage constantly, not in a pressured way but with the easy certainty of two people who'd already been building a life together for years. He designed our dream house on napkins and notebook margins, a small sustainable home with a medical office attached, maybe near the coast where I could provide rural emergency care and he could focus on environmental architecture. We had a 5-year plan, a 10-year vision, and a shared understanding that we were stronger together than either of us could be alone. Saturday nights meant date nights that felt effortless, trying new restaurants or attending art gallery openings, always talking about ideas that excited us, always laughing at inside jokes that had developed over years of shared experiences. I felt secure in a way I'd never experienced with my family, loved unconditionally, supported without having to earn it through achievement or crisis management. But even during those golden months, there were subtle warning signs I should have recognized, small cracks in the foundation that would later become fault lines. My family had always treated my relationship with Daniel as temporary, calling him Zoe's friend even after we'd been together for years, asking when I was going to find someone more suitable for a doctor. During family gatherings, they'd make comments about how Daniel's artistic sensibilities were nice for now, but impractical long-term, how I needed someone who understood the demands of medical practice. My mother would call during my rare free evenings, interrupting dinner dates or quiet time with Daniel, always with some family emergency that required my immediate attention and medical expertise. She'd ask me to diagnose strange symptoms over the phone, research treatment options for relatives I barely knew, or mediate disputes between family members about health decisions. Daniel noticed these patterns before I did, gently pointing out how my family only seemed to value my presence when they needed something medical-related, how they dismissed his importance in my life while expecting me to prioritize their every concern. I'd brush off his observations, making excuses about family loyalty and cultural expectations, not wanting to acknowledge that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had actually turned my profession into a tool for their convenience. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, when my phone rang at 6:15, while Daniel and I were sharing coffee and planning a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. It was my sister Michelle, her voice shaking with panic, telling me that Dad had collapsed during his morning run in Riverside Park and was being rushed to Portland General Hospital. My first instinct was to throw on scrubs and race to the hospital, to be there as both his daughter and a medical professional who might be able to help coordinate his care, or at least understand what the doctors were telling the family. But as I was grabbing my keys and medical bag, already mentally preparing for the worst-case scenarios my training had taught me to consider, Michelle said something that stopped me cold in the doorway of our apartment, her words cutting through my panic like a scalpel through skin. My family had been planning Dad's 60th birthday party for months, a surprise celebration they'd been organizing in secret group chats and weekend meetings I'd never been invited to join. They'd booked the private dining room at Dad's favorite steakhouse, invited all his friends and colleagues, arranged for his favorite band from college to reunite for one night, even flown in his brother from Chicago. The party was scheduled for Saturday 4 days away, and they'd spent weeks coordinating schedules, ordering custom decorations, planning a photo slideshow of Dad's life that would feature pictures from every important moment. As Michelle explained this to me while I stood frozen in my apartment doorway, keys in one hand and medical bag in the other, I realized they'd planned the most important celebration of our father's life and hadn't included me in any of it. No invitation, no consultation about dates, no request for help with planning or organizing or contributing financially. They'd simply decided I wasn't necessary for this milestone moment, that Dad's 60th birthday could happen perfectly well without his youngest daughter's presence or participation. The conversation with Michelle felt surreal, like I was floating outside my body watching someone else's life implode in slow motion. She was calling to tell me Dad was in the hospital fighting for his life, but she spent the first 10 minutes explaining party logistics and asking if I thought Dad would be well enough to attend his own surprise celebration. Not once did she ask if I wanted to come to the hospital, if I needed support during this terrifying moment, or if my medical training might be useful in understanding his condition and prognosis. Instead, she launched into detailed explanations of why they'd decided not to include me in the party planning, citing my busy residency schedule and my tendency to overthink family events. She said they'd figured I wouldn't have time to contribute meaningfully to the planning anyway, and they wanted to keep things simple and stress-free for everyone involved. When I finally interrupted to say I was coming to the hospital immediately, she paused and said, "Oh well, Mom and James are already there, and you know how crowded those ICU rooms get. Maybe wait until we know more." The words hit me like a physical blow, the realization that my own family was actively discouraging me from coming to my father's bedside during the most frightening moment of his life. I hung up the phone and stood in our apartment's tiny entryway, Daniel watching me with growing concern while I processed what had just happened. My family had excluded me from planning the most significant celebration of my father's life, then actively discouraged me from rushing to his side during a medical emergency that could have killed him. They'd reduced me to a convenience, someone to call for medical advice over the phone, but not important enough to include in the actual family circle during crisis or celebration. The betrayal felt physical, like someone had reached into my chest and rewired my heart while I wasn't paying attention. Daniel wrapped his arms around me, while I cried angry tears of realization, finally understanding that my family had never seen me as a full member, just a useful resource they could access when needed and ignore when convenient. He held me while I called the hospital directly, using my medical credentials to get updates on Dad's condition, learning that he was stable but would need extensive cardiac workup and possibly surgery. Then he drove me to the hospital, despite my family's discouragement, because he understood that being there was my right as a daughter and my responsibility as someone who loved my father unconditionally. The next few hours in the hospital waiting room revealed everything I needed to know about my family's true priorities and my actual place in their hierarchy of importance. Mom, Michelle, and my brother James had claimed the comfortable chairs near the nurse's station, speaking in hushed tones and making decisions about Dad's care without consulting me, despite my medical training and intimate knowledge of cardiac emergencies. When I approached to offer support and ask about his condition, they looked at me like I was intruding on a private family moment, not like I was a beloved daughter and sister who'd raced to the hospital to help during a crisis. Mom barely acknowledged my presence, instead focusing on phone calls to relatives and friends, updating them on Dad's condition while completely ignoring the fact that I was standing 3 feet away with tears streaming down my face. James was coordinating with Dad's insurance company and discussing treatment options with doctors, conversations I should have been included in given my medical expertise, but he literally turned his back to me when I tried to participate. Michelle was handling party logistics over the phone, trying to determine whether they should cancel or postpone the surprise celebration, and when she noticed me listening, she moved to a more private corner to continue her conversations away from my hearing. The most devastating moment came when Dr. Patterson, the attending cardiologist, came to speak with the family about Dad's condition and treatment options. He was a colleague I knew from my emergency medicine rotations, someone who respected my clinical judgment and often consulted with me about complex cases. When he saw me in the waiting room, he naturally assumed I was there as both family member and medical colleague, beginning to explain Dad's condition in technical terms I could understand and contribute to. But before he could finish his assessment, Mom interrupted to say, "Dr. Zoe is very busy with her residency, so could you please explain everything in simpler terms for those of us who aren't medical professionals?" She was literally asking him to dumb down the conversation to exclude me, treating my medical training as an inconvenience rather than a valuable resource during our family's medical crisis. Dr. Patterson looked confused, glancing between my mother and me, clearly uncertain why a family would reject medical expertise during such a critical moment. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and hurt, realizing that my own mother was actively undermining my professional credibility and family standing in front of a colleague who respected my abilities. James and Michelle nodded in agreement with Mom's request, and I watched Dr. Patterson reluctantly switch to explaining Dad's condition in elementary terms, avoiding the technical details that would have helped me understand the full scope of his diagnosis and treatment plan. That evening, while Dad was stable but still in ICU, my family held what they called a planning meeting in the hospital cafeteria to discuss both his ongoing care and whether to proceed with the birthday party. They invited me to join them, but when I sat down at their table with my coffee and notepad ready to contribute my medical insights and party planning ideas, I realized they'd already made all the important decisions without me. They'd consulted with Dad's primary care physician about his prognosis, researched the best cardiac surgeons in Portland, and decided to proceed with a modified version of the birthday celebration that would take place in his hospital room if necessary. Every significant choice had been made in family group chats and phone calls I'd been excluded from, and they were simply informing me of decisions rather than seeking my input or participation. When I suggested postponing the party until Dad was discharged and fully recovered, Michelle rolled her eyes and said, "Zoe, we've already put deposits down and coordinated everyone's schedules. We can't just change everything because you think it's not the perfect timing." James added that they'd considered my opinion, but decided to prioritize Dad's wishes, as if I was the only family member who didn't understand what our father would want during his recovery. The conversation continued around me rather than including me, and when I tried to share relevant medical information about cardiac recovery timelines, Mom held up her hand and said, "Honey, we've already talked to the real doctors about all of this medical stuff. Let's focus on practical family matters." I left that meeting feeling like I'd been systematically erased from my own family, reduced from beloved daughter and medical professional to unwanted outsider whose opinions and expertise were actively unwelcome. Daniel picked me up from the hospital, and during the drive home, I tried to explain the complex emotions swirling through my exhausted brain. I felt guilty for being heard about party planning when Dad was fighting for his life, but I also felt devastated by the realization that my family had been excluding me from important decisions and celebrations for months or maybe years. The birthday party was just the most obvious example of a pattern I'd been too loyal and hopeful to recognize clearly. Daniel listened without trying to fix anything, just holding space for my anger and confusion, occasionally squeezing my hand when my voice broke with fresh waves of grief. As we pulled into our apartment complex, he said quietly, "Zoe, you know this isn't about the party, right? This is about them treating you like you don't belong in your own family unless they need something from you." His words crystallized everything I'd been struggling to articulate. The painful truth that my family loved my medical degree more than they loved me as a person. 3 days later, while Dad was recovering well from his angioplasty and preparing for discharge, I received a text message that would become the moment everything changed irreversibly between my family and me. Michelle wrote, "Dad's doing great. Doctors say he can come home tomorrow. BTW. We decided to go ahead with the party on Saturday as planned. Everyone's so excited to celebrate his recovery too. It'll be perfect timing." The message was sent to our family group chat, the one they'd apparently created without including me, and I only received it because Michelle forwarded it individually. Reading her words, I felt a cold clarity settle over me like armor. They were proceeding with Dad's 60th birthday celebration, the milestone party they'd planned for months, and they still weren't inviting me to attend. My father had nearly died. I'd spent 3 days advocating for his medical care and supporting the family through crisis, and they were still treating me like an optional family member whose presence at important celebrations was unnecessary and unwelcome. But then 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a call that would reveal the true depth of my family's dysfunction and entitlement. It was Mom, her voice suddenly warm and concerned, asking if I had any time this weekend to help with a small family situation. She explained that they'd discovered Dad would need a prescription filled for specialized cardiac medication that was difficult to obtain, something that required prior authorization and careful coordination with his cardiologist and insurance company. The pharmacy was giving them trouble about approval timelines, and they needed someone with medical credentials to call and expedite the process, maybe even prescribe a temporary bridge medication to ensure Dad didn't miss any doses during his critical recovery period. She wondered if I might be able to use my medical license to help navigate the bureaucratic obstacles and ensure Dad received proper care without delays or complications. As she spoke, I realized she was asking me to leverage my professional credentials and reputation to solve their medication access problem, the same weekend they were celebrating Dad's life and recovery without inviting me to participate in the celebration itself. The irony was so sharp it felt like being stabbed with surgical instruments. They didn't want me at the party, but they wanted my medical license to ensure Dad's recovery proceeded smoothly. They'd excluded me from months of planning, decision-making, and preparation, but they expected me to risk my professional standing by potentially bending prescribing protocols to help them access medication through unofficial channels. Mom's tone had shifted from dismissive to sweetly manipulative, suddenly treating me like a beloved daughter whose expertise was desperately needed, conveniently forgetting that she'd spent the last 3 days undermining my medical knowledge and excluding me from family decisions. She was asking me to solve their problem while simultaneously making it clear that I remained unwelcome at the celebration of Dad's survival and milestone birthday. The conversation felt like the culmination of years of conditional love, where my value to the family was determined entirely by my usefulness, rather than my inherent worth as their daughter and sister. I told Mom I needed to think about it and would call her back, then sat in my apartment living room staring at the framed photo of Dad and me from my medical school graduation. In the picture, he was beaming with pride, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera while I held my diploma. I remembered that day so clearly, how he'd told everyone at the graduation ceremony that his daughter was going to save lives, how he'd insisted on taking hundreds of photos and celebrating at my favorite restaurant afterward. That was the father I'd thought I was fighting for in the hospital, the man who'd supported my dreams and celebrated my achievements. But the family requesting my professional help while excluding me from personal celebration wasn't operating from that kind of love and pride. They were treating me like a service provider, someone whose medical training made me useful for solving their problems but whose emotional needs and family belonging were irrelevant to their comfort and convenience. Daniel found me crying over that graduation photo, and when I explained the phone call and the impossible position my family had created, he held me while I processed the full scope of their manipulation and emotional abuse. He helped me understand that this wasn't just about party invitations or medication logistics, but about a fundamental pattern where my family only valued me when I could provide them with something they needed. They'd been using my medical knowledge as a resource for years, calling me for free consultations, diagnosis assistance and treatment recommendations, while simultaneously treating my personal needs and family relationships as secondary concerns. The birthday party exclusion was cruel, but the expectation that I'd still provide professional services despite that exclusion revealed the transactional nature of their supposed love. Daniel suggested that maybe it was time to establish clear boundaries about when and how I was willing to use my medical training to help family members, especially family members who didn't seem to respect me as a whole person deserving of inclusion and consideration. That night, I made a decision that would change everything between my family and me forever. I wouldn't be attending Dad's birthday party because I hadn't been invited, but I also wouldn't be providing my medical license as a solution to their medication access problems. If they wanted to exclude me from celebrating his life, they could handle the administrative challenges of his healthcare without my professional intervention. I spent Friday evening crafting a text message that was honest but not cruel, direct but not inflammatory. I wrote, "I'm glad Dad is recovering well. I won't be able to help with the medication authorization issues this weekend, but his cardiologist and primary care physician should be able to coordinate everything he needs for proper care. Hope the party goes well." I sent the message to the family group chat Michelle had finally added me to, then turned off my phone and spent the evening cooking dinner with Daniel, trying to focus on the healthy relationships in my life rather than mourning the dysfunction of my family dynamics. Saturday morning brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls that revealed just how entitled and manipulative my family had become over the years of exploiting my medical training for their convenience. The first call came from James at 8 a.m., his voice tight with frustration, explaining that the pharmacy was being completely unreasonable about Dad's medication authorization, and they really needed my help to resolve the situation before the party that afternoon. He seemed genuinely confused that I wasn't immediately available to solve their problem, as if my medical license existed solely for their benefit rather than as the result of my own hard work and professional development. When I reminded him that I'd already explained I couldn't help with the medication issues, he became annoyed and said, "Zoe, this is Dad we're talking about. You can't just abandon your own father because you're upset about some party planning miscommunication." The way he framed my boundary setting as abandonment while simultaneously defending their exclusion of me from the party revealed everything I needed to know about how they viewed my role in the family hierarchy. The second call came from Michelle an hour later, her tone shifting from entitled to guilty as she tried a different manipulation strategy. She acknowledged that they probably should have included me more in the party planning, and suggested that maybe I could still come to the celebration if I helped with Dad's medication situation first. The conditional nature of her apology was stunning, literally offering family inclusion as a reward for professional services, making explicit the transactional relationship they'd been imposing on me for years. She explained that they'd already told Dad I would handle the medication authorization, and now they were worried about disappointing him during his recovery period. The emotional blackmail was expertly crafted, designed to make me feel responsible for Dad's potential medical complications, while ignoring their role in creating this crisis through poor planning and inappropriate expectations. When I maintained my boundary about not providing professional services, Michelle's tone shifted to accusatory, and she said, "I can't believe you're choosing to be petty over party invitations when Dad's health is at stake." The final call came from Mom at noon, her voice combining desperation with moral outrage in a way that revealed the full extent of her narcissistic manipulation techniques. She was calling from the hospital, where they'd brought Dad for his final discharge checkup before the party, and she put him on the phone to ask me personally to help with the medication situation. Hearing Dad's voice, still weak from his cardiac event but trying to sound upbeat about his recovery, nearly broke my resolve to maintain boundaries with the rest of the family. He said, "Zoe honey, your mom says there's some confusion with my heart medication, and they thought maybe you could help sort it out with your doctor credentials. I know you're busy with your residency, but I'd really appreciate any help you can give." The manipulation was perfect, using Dad's genuine gratitude and trust to pressure me into providing services for family members who'd been systematically excluding and disrespecting me for months or years. But what happened next crystallized everything I needed to understand about my family's dysfunction and my own enabling patterns. I could hear Mom and Michelle coaching Dad in the background, literally feeding him lines about how important it was for me to help with the medication authorization, how much it would mean to him during his recovery. They were using his vulnerability and medical crisis as leverage to manipulate me into compliance, willing to exploit his genuine need for care to maintain their pattern of demanding my professional services without offering basic family respect in return. When I gently explained to Dad that his cardiologist and primary care physician were the appropriate doctors to handle his medication authorization, and that I wasn't able to intervene in his care from outside his official medical team, Mom grabbed the phone and accused me of abandoning my own father when he needs me most. The conversation devolved into her listing all the ways I'd disappointed the family over the years, how my busy medical career had made me selfish and unloving, how my relationship with Daniel had changed me into someone who didn't prioritize family obligations appropriately. That afternoon, while my family celebrated Dad's 60th birthday without me, I sat in my apartment researching the legal and ethical implications of prescribing medication for family members, particularly in situations involving prior authorization and insurance coordination. What I discovered made me realize how inappropriate and potentially dangerous their request had actually been. Medical licensing boards have strict guidelines about treating family members, especially for serious conditions like cardiac medication management, and pharmacies have legitimate reasons for requiring proper authorization channels rather than accepting prescriptions from doctors outside a patient's official care team. They'd been asking me to potentially violate professional protocols and risk my medical license to solve their administrative inconvenience, all while treating me like an optional family member whose presence at important celebrations was unnecessary. The more I researched, the angrier I became about years of similar requests where they'd expected me to provide free medical services without considering the professional risks or ethical complications involved. Daniel came home from a Saturday bike ride to find me surrounded by medical ethics textbooks and licensing board documentation, researching whether I'd been wrong to refuse their request or whether they'd been wrong to make it in the first place. He sat down beside me on our living room floor, looking at the evidence I'd compiled, and said something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. "Zoe, the medication thing is just the latest example. They've been treating your medical degree like their personal property for years, expecting you to diagnose their symptoms, research their conditions, and solve their healthcare problems for free, without ever acknowledging that you're a person with your own life and needs and professional boundaries." He was right, and as I thought back over recent years, I could see the pattern clearly. Every family gathering included requests for medical advice. Every phone call involved someone's mysterious symptoms that needed my immediate attention, and they'd even given my contact information to extended family members and family friends who needed medical consultations but couldn't afford proper care. That evening, while my family was presumably enjoying Dad's birthday celebration at his favorite steakhouse, I received a series of text messages that revealed the true aftermath of my boundary setting and their failed manipulation attempts. The first message came from Michelle. "Party was beautiful, Dad loved it. Too bad you missed it over something so silly." The passive-aggressive tone was designed to make me feel guilty for missing the celebration, while simultaneously reinforcing that my exclusion had been my own choice rather than their decision. The second message came from James. "Had to take Dad to urgent care after the party. Medication situation got complicated. Could have used your help." The implication was clear. Dad's medical complications were my fault for refusing to provide professional services, rather than their fault for poor planning and inappropriate expectations. The third message came from Mom. "Your father was asking why you weren't at his party. I told him you were too busy with work to come. He seemed sad but understanding. I hope you're happy with your choices. Reading those messages, I felt a complex mixture of emotions that took hours to process fully. I was devastated to learn that Dad had experienced medical complications, guilty that I hadn't been there to help during his party, and angry that my family was using his disappointment as emotional ammunition against me. But I was also relieved to finally see their manipulation tactics clearly, without the fog of family loyalty and emotional conditioning that had prevented me from recognizing the patterns earlier. They were using Dad's medical crisis and emotional disappointment to punish me for establishing professional boundaries, while simultaneously reinforcing the exclusion that had started this entire conflict. The messages were designed to make me feel responsible for Dad's complications and sadness, while avoiding any acknowledgement of their role in creating the crisis through poor planning, inappropriate demands, and systematic family exclusion. The next morning, I called Dad directly at home, bypassing the family gatekeepers who'd been filtering our communication and controlling the narrative about my absence from his celebration. I needed to hear from him personally about his medical complications, his feelings about my absence from the party, and his understanding of the medication authorization situation they'd been pressuring me to resolve. When he answered the phone, his voice was tired but warm, and he immediately said, "Zoe, honey, I'm sorry you couldn't make it to the party yesterday. Your mom said you had work obligations, but I was hoping to see you." The conversation that followed revealed that my family had been lying to him about my absence, telling him I was too busy with my residency to attend rather than explaining that they'd never invited me in the first place. They'd also exaggerated the severity of his medication complications, describing routine pharmacy delays as emergency situations that required immediate medical intervention rather than normal administrative processing that would resolve within a few business days. Talking to Dad directly, without family interference and manipulation, reminded me of why I'd gone into medicine in the first place, and why his opinion mattered so much to me despite the toxic dynamics with the rest of the family. He was genuinely proud of my career and accomplishments, grateful for my medical knowledge when appropriately applied, and confused by the tension between his children that seemed to escalate whenever health issues arose. When I gently explained that I hadn't actually been invited to his birthday party, and that the family had been pressuring me to use my medical license inappropriately to resolve their medication access problems, he was quiet for a long time before saying, "Zoe, I don't understand why your siblings would exclude you from my party, and I certainly don't want you to compromise your professional ethics to solve problems that should be handled through proper medical channels." His response confirmed what I'd already known intellectually, but needed to hear emotionally. The conflict wasn't really about medicine or party planning, but about respect, inclusion, and the fundamental question of whether I belonged in my own family as a full member rather than a convenient resource. That conversation with Dad also revealed the extent to which my family had been manipulating information and controlling narratives to maintain their version of family dynamics. They'd told him I was too busy to attend his party, rather than admitting they'd excluded me from the planning and invitation process. They described his medication situation as an emergency requiring my immediate professional intervention, rather than acknowledging it was routine prior authorization that would be resolved through normal medical channels within a few days. They'd positioned my boundary setting as selfishness and abandonment, rather than explaining the inappropriate nature of their demands and the professional risks they'd been asking me to assume. Most significantly, they'd been using his genuine love and concern for me as leverage to pressure me into compliance with their demands, exploiting his recovery period and emotional vulnerability to maintain their pattern of entitlement and control. The week following Dad's birthday brought a series of escalating family pressures that revealed the full scope of their commitment to maintaining dysfunctional patterns rather than addressing the underlying issues of respect and inclusion. Michelle called every day with updates about Dad's recovery, but each conversation included subtle guilt trips about my absence from the party and pointed questions about whether I was still upset about the invitation misunderstanding. She seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that excluding me from months of party planning wasn't a miscommunication but a deliberate choice that revealed their true feelings about my place in the family hierarchy. When I tried to explain how hurtful the exclusion had been, she responded with dismissive comments about how I was being too sensitive and making everything about myself instead of focusing on Dad's recovery and family unity. Her inability to acknowledge the problem, combined with her expectation that I should simply forget about being excluded and return to normal family functioning, showed me that she had no intention of changing the patterns that had created this crisis. James took a different approach, scheduling what he called a family meeting to discuss Dad's ongoing care needs and our communication problems that had supposedly caused confusion during his medical emergency. The meeting was held at Mom's house on a Thursday evening, in the formal dining room where family discussions about serious topics had always taken place during our childhood. James had prepared an agenda that focused primarily on Dad's recovery timeline, his medication schedule, his dietary restrictions, and the family's plan for supporting him through cardiac rehabilitation. But buried in the agenda was a section about utilizing Zoe's medical expertise appropriately that revealed their continued expectation that I would provide ongoing professional services for Dad's care, despite the boundary issues that had already been clearly identified and discussed. When I pointed out that Dad had an excellent cardiologist and primary care physician managing his recovery, and that my role should be supportive daughter rather than medical consultant, James looked genuinely confused and said, "But Zoe, you're the one with medical training. It would be irresponsible not to use your knowledge to help Dad get the best possible care." The family meeting devolved into a confrontation that made everyone's true positions and motivations painfully clear. Mom spent 20 minutes listing all the ways I'd disappointed the family over the years, focusing particularly on how my relationship with Daniel had supposedly changed my priorities and made me less available for family obligations. She mentioned specific instances where I'd declined to provide medical advice for extended family members, times when I'd been unable to attend family events due to residency schedule demands, and occasions when I'd chosen to spend holidays with Daniel's family instead of my own. Her list revealed that she'd been keeping a detailed inventory of my perceived failures and shortcomings, building a case against me that justified their exclusion and mistreatment in her mind. When I tried to defend my choices and explain the professional boundaries that guided my medical practice, she interrupted to say, "Zoe, family comes first, and if you can't understand that basic principle, then maybe you need to reevaluate what really matters in your life." The most devastating moment of the meeting came when Michelle and James presented what they called a family care plan for Dad's recovery, a detailed document outlining everyone's responsibilities and contributions to his ongoing health management. The plan assigned specific roles to each family member, including Mom's coordination of medical appointments, James's management of insurance and financial matters, and Michelle's handling of meal preparation and household support. My assigned role was medical consultation and emergency response, which included monitoring Dad's vital signs during family visits, reviewing his medication regimen for potential interactions or side effects, researching treatment options for any new symptoms or concerns, and serving as the family's primary contact for his medical providers. The plan essentially appointed me as Dad's unpaid personal physician, responsible for aspects of his care that should have been handled by his official medical team, while simultaneously assigning me no role in the emotional or social support that constituted the bulk of actual family caregiving. When I objected to the appropriateness and legality of the medical responsibilities they'd assigned to me, pointing out that family members cannot and should not serve as primary medical providers for relatives, they responded with a coordinated attack that revealed years of resentment and manipulation I'd been too loyal to recognize clearly. James accused me of using my medical degree as an excuse to avoid family responsibilities, claiming that I thought I was too important to help with Dad's care now that I was a real doctor. Michelle said she couldn't understand why I was suddenly concerned about professional boundaries when I'd never mentioned them before during years of providing medical advice and assistance to family members. Mom delivered the final blow by saying, "Zoe, if your medical training has made you too proud to help your own family, then maybe you've learned the wrong lessons from all those years of education we supported and sacrificed for." The implication was clear. They viewed my medical degree as their investment rather than my achievement, something that created obligations to them rather than opportunities for me. That night, driving home from the family meeting with Daniel, I finally understood the full scope of the toxic dynamics I'd been enabling and enduring for years. My family had been systematically using my medical training for their convenience while simultaneously undermining my personal relationships, professional boundaries, and emotional well-being. They expected me to provide free medical services whenever they needed healthcare advice or assistance, but they excluded me from important family decisions and celebrations when my medical knowledge wasn't immediately useful. They wanted me to risk my professional license and reputation to solve their administrative problems, but they dismissed my concerns about appropriate medical protocols and ethical boundaries. Most significantly, they'd been using Dad's genuine love for me as leverage to manipulate me into compliance with their unreasonable demands, exploiting his medical crisis and recovery period to maintain their pattern of conditional family inclusion. Daniel listened to my processing of the evening's revelations without trying to fix anything or offer immediate solutions, just providing the steady emotional support that had become the foundation of our relationship over 6 years together. As we sat in our apartment living room, he helped me understand that the family meeting had actually clarified important questions about my future relationships with my mother, siblings, and even Dad. The care plan they'd presented wasn't really about supporting Dad's recovery, but about maintaining their access to my medical expertise while avoiding any changes to the dysfunctional family patterns that had created the birthday party exclusion in the first place. They wanted me to continue providing professional services without receiving basic respect and inclusion in return, essentially offering me the role of family medical consultant rather than beloved daughter and sister. Daniel pointed out that healthy families don't assign medical responsibilities to relatives without their consent, don't exclude members from important celebrations while expecting their professional assistance, and don't use guilt and manipulation to override clearly stated boundaries. The following weekend brought the confrontation that would permanently change my relationship with my family and force everyone to acknowledge the unsustainable nature of the patterns we'd all been perpetuating for years. I'd spent the week researching family therapy options, legal protections for medical professionals who declined to treat relatives, and resources for adult children dealing with narcissistic family dynamics. I'd also consulted with my residency supervisor about the ethical implications of the care plan my family had proposed, and her response had confirmed everything I'd suspected about the inappropriateness and potential danger of their expectations. She'd been shocked that family members would expect me to serve as Dad's primary medical consultant while he was already receiving excellent care from qualified specialists, and she'd warned me about the legal liability issues that could arise if I accepted responsibility for aspects of his care that were outside my specialty area and professional relationship. Armed with professional guidance and moral clarity, I decided to have one final conversation with my family about boundaries, respect, and the future of our relationships. I'd invited them to meet me at a neutral location, the community center where Daniel's firm had designed a beautiful meditation garden, hoping that the peaceful environment would encourage honest communication rather than the defensive manipulation that had characterized our recent interactions. I'd prepared talking points about healthy family dynamics, appropriate uses of medical training within families, and my need for inclusion and respect rather than just utility and convenience. I'd also brought documentation from medical licensing boards about treating family members, hoping to help them understand that my boundaries weren't personal rejection, but professional necessity and ethical responsibility. But as I sat in the meditation garden waiting for my family to arrive, I realized that I was still approaching this conflict as if it were a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better communication and clearer information. The truth was that my family understood my position perfectly well, but they simply disagreed with my right to establish boundaries that inconvenienced them or challenged their sense of entitlement to my professional services. They weren't confused about appropriate family dynamics or medical ethics. They were choosing to prioritize their own comfort and convenience over my professional integrity and emotional well-being. The birthday party exclusion wasn't a planning oversight or communication failure, but a deliberate choice that revealed their true feelings about my value to the family beyond my medical usefulness. I was about to have a confrontation that would force everyone to choose between maintaining dysfunctional patterns and building healthier relationships based on mutual respect and consideration. Mom arrived first, her expression already defensive and annoyed before the conversation had even begun. She'd brought a folder of documents related to Dad's care, including medical bills, insurance correspondence, and a list of questions she wanted me to research and answer about his recovery timeline and prognosis. Before I could even explain why I'd requested this meeting, she launched into a detailed explanation of why the family needed my continued medical support for Dad's care, emphasizing his vulnerability during recovery and the complexity of cardiac rehabilitation that required expert guidance and monitoring. Her approach revealed that she'd completely misunderstood the purpose of our meeting, assuming I'd invited them to discuss logistics of my medical involvement rather than to address the fundamental relationship problems that had created this crisis. When I gently interrupted to explain that we needed to talk about respect, boundaries, and inclusion rather than medical care coordination, she looked genuinely confused and said, "Zoe, your father's health is more important than whatever personal issues you think we need to discuss." Michelle and James arrived together, and their coordinated response to my attempts to discuss family dynamics revealed that they'd prepared for this conversation by strategizing ways to redirect focus back to Dad's medical needs and away from their exclusionary and manipulative behaviors. Every time I tried to address the birthday party exclusion, they responded with examples of how much they'd already done to support Dad's recovery and how much additional help they needed from me to ensure his continued progress. When I explained my concerns about the appropriateness of serving as his unofficial medical consultant, they presented testimonials from extended family members who'd benefited from my medical advice over the years, arguing that I'd set a precedent of family medical involvement that I couldn't suddenly abandon during Dad's most vulnerable period. Their arguments were sophisticated and emotionally manipulative, designed to make me feel guilty for prioritizing professional ethics over family loyalty, while completely avoiding any acknowledgement of their role in creating the conflict through exclusion and disrespect. The conversation reached a turning point when I presented the documentation I'd gathered about medical ethics and family treatment guidelines, hoping to help them understand that my boundaries weren't arbitrary personal preferences but professional requirements with legal and ethical implications. Instead of engaging with the information thoughtfully, they reacted with anger and incredulity that I would bring outside authorities into family discussions and use professional regulations as weapons against people who loved me. James said, "Zoe, I can't believe you'd rather follow some bureaucratic rules than help your own father recover from a heart attack." Michelle added, "This is exactly what we've been worried about, that medical school has made you think you're too important to care about family obligations." Mom delivered the most painful accusation. "Zoe, you're using your medical degree as an excuse to abandon your family when we need you most, and I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter would choose professional pride over love for her father." But then something unexpected happened that shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation and revealed information that changed everything I thought I understood about my family's motivations and the birthday party exclusion. Daniel arrived at the meditation garden, not because I'd invited him but because he'd been worried about my emotional state and wanted to provide support during what he knew would be a difficult conversation. My family's reaction to his presence was immediate and revealing, with Mom actually saying, "Daniel, this is a private family discussion and we'd appreciate some space to work through our issues." Her attempt to exclude him from a conversation about my relationships and boundaries revealed everything I needed to know about their respect for my partnership and their understanding of who constituted my real family. But Daniel's response surprised everyone, including me. Instead of leaving or defending his right to be there, he calmly said, "Actually, I think there are some things Zoe should know about the birthday party planning that might help everyone understand why this situation has become so painful and complicated." What Daniel revealed next made me understand that the birthday party exclusion hadn't been casual thoughtlessness or poor communication, but a deliberate strategy designed to test my loyalty to the family versus my commitment to him and our relationship. He'd been contacted by Michelle 6 weeks before Dad's birthday, not to invite him to the party, but to ask whether he thought I would be upset about being excluded from the planning process. She'd explained that the family was concerned about my increasing independence and my tendency to prioritize my relationship with him over my family obligations, and they wanted to see whether I would choose to attend Dad's party even if I hadn't been involved in planning it. The birthday party had been a test of my family loyalty, designed to force me to choose between maintaining relationships with them and maintaining boundaries around respect and inclusion. When I'd established boundaries about providing medical services after being excluded from the party, I'd failed their test by prioritizing my professional ethics and personal dignity over their access to my medical expertise. The revelation that my family had deliberately excluded me from Dad's birthday party as a loyalty test, rather than accidentally overlooking my involvement due to busy schedules or poor communication, felt like being emotionally flatlaid by a truck carrying years of manipulation and conditional love. Everything I'd been questioning about the situation suddenly made perfect sense. The coordinated responses during Dad's medical emergency, the immediate pressure to provide professional services despite the party exclusion, the escalating demands for medical involvement without any acknowledgement of their hurtful behavior. They'd been systematically testing whether I would prioritize their needs over my own dignity, whether I would provide professional services despite personal mistreatment, whether I would choose family loyalty over professional integrity and healthy boundaries. The birthday party was just the most obvious example of a pattern that had probably been operating for years without my conscious recognition. Daniel's revelation also explained why they'd reacted so strongly to my boundary setting around Dad's medication authorization and ongoing medical care. My refusal to provide professional services after being excluded from the party wasn't just disappointing to them, it was evidence that their loyalty test had failed, that I was choosing self-respect and professional ethics over family obligations and conditional acceptance. They'd been expecting me to absorb the hurt of exclusion while still providing the medical services they'd grown accustomed to accessing through me, proving that my love for Dad and commitment to the family was stronger than my need for inclusion and respect. When I'd established boundaries instead, I'd demonstrated that my medical training had indeed changed me in ways they couldn't control or manipulate, making me less willing to accept mistreatment in exchange for conditional family belonging. The confrontation that followed Daniel's revelation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with my family, characterized by a level of honesty and emotional intensity that stripped away years of polite dysfunction and revealed the true nature of our relationships. Mom was furious that Daniel had betrayed family confidences by revealing their conversation with Michelle, demanding to know what other private family discussions he'd been monitoring or influencing. James accused him of deliberately sabotaging family relationships by encouraging my independence and boundary setting, claiming that I'd never had problems with family obligations until I'd started prioritizing my relationship with him over family loyalty. Michelle actually said, "Daniel, you've turned Zoe against her own family, and now she thinks she's too good to help us when we need her medical expertise." But their attacks on Daniel revealed more about their dysfunction than anything I could have discovered through family therapy or difficult conversations about respect and boundaries. They were angry that he'd provided me with emotional support and perspective that helped me recognize their manipulative patterns, furious that he'd encouraged me to value myself enough to establish professional boundaries and expect inclusion in family celebrations. They weren't concerned about losing access to my love and support as a daughter and sister, they were concerned about losing access to my medical expertise and professional services without having to provide respect and inclusion in return. Daniel represented everything they couldn't control about my adult life: healthy relationship dynamics, unconditional love and support, encouragement of my professional development, and validation of my right to establish boundaries that protected my well-being and integrity. I stood in the meditation garden Daniel had helped design, surrounded by my family's anger and manipulation, and felt a clarity settle over me that was both devastating and liberating. These people had raised me, supported my education, and celebrated my achievements, but they'd also systematically conditioned me to accept conditional love, to provide professional services without receiving personal respect, and to prioritize their needs over my own dignity and well-being. The birthday party test revealed that they'd been deliberately monitoring and evaluating my loyalty rather than simply loving me as a daughter and sister deserving of inclusion and consideration. They'd been using Dad's genuine love for me as leverage to manipulate me into providing medical services that compromised my professional ethics and legal standing, while simultaneously excluding me from family celebrations that honored his life and recovery. Looking at Mom, Michelle, and James in that moment, I realized that I had a choice to make that would determine the entire future of our relationships. I could continue accepting their conditional love, providing medical services whenever they deemed necessary, attending family events when convenient for them, and absorbing their emotional manipulation in exchange for belonging to a family that didn't actually respect or value me as a complete person. Or I could establish firm boundaries about respect, inclusion, and appropriate use of my professional training, risking the complete loss of family relationships, but gaining the opportunity to build my life around people who loved me unconditionally and supported my growth rather than trying to control and exploit my achievements. The choice felt simultaneously impossible and obvious, terrifying and necessary, devastating and hopeful. I took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "I love Dad, and I'll always be grateful for the support you provided during my education and training. But I won't continue providing medical services for family members who exclude me from family celebrations, who test my loyalty instead of loving me unconditionally, and who use manipulation and guilt to override my professional boundaries. If you want access to my medical expertise, you need to treat me with the same respect and inclusion you show each other. If you want me to be part of this family, you need to invite me to family events and include me in family decisions. I'm not willing to be your medical consultant while being excluded from being your daughter and sister." The words felt like they were cutting my throat as I spoke them, but they also felt like the first completely honest thing I'd said to my family in years. The immediate aftermath of my ultimatum revealed everything I needed to know about their priorities and their willingness to change the dysfunctional patterns that had created this crisis. Instead of apologizing for the birthday party exclusion or acknowledging the inappropriate nature of their medical demands, they reacted with coordinated outrage that I would threaten to withdraw medical support from Dad during his recovery period. Mom accused me of holding my father's health hostage to get my way about party invitations, as if my request for basic inclusion and respect was emotional blackmail rather than reasonable boundary setting. James said I was being manipulative and cruel by making medical assistance conditional on family treatment, completely ignoring that they'd made family inclusion conditional on my willingness to provide professional services without receiving respect in return. Michelle delivered the line that revealed their fundamental understanding of my value to the family. "Zoe, if you're not going to help Dad with his medical needs, then what exactly do you bring to this family?" Her question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, making visible the destruction that had been building for years without anyone acknowledging the flames. What did I bring to the family besides my medical expertise? According to Michelle's worldview, apparently nothing valuable enough to warrant inclusion in celebration planning or consideration in family decisions. I was useful for diagnosing symptoms, researching treatments, providing emergency medical guidance and solving healthcare bureaucracy problems, but beyond those professional services, I apparently had no inherent value as their daughter and sister. The question revealed that they'd been reducing me to my medical degree for years, seeing me as a resource to be accessed rather than a person to be loved, celebrating my achievements only insofar as they benefited the family's convenience and security. Standing there in Daniel's meditation garden, I felt the last threads of family loyalty and emotional conditioning finally snap under the weight of their revealed priorities and expectations. I said, "Michelle, if you have to ask what I bring to this family besides medical services, then you've already answered the question about whether this is a family worth belonging to." I turned to Mom and added, "You've spent my entire adult life conditioning me to believe that love is earned through usefulness, that belonging is contingent on service, and that boundaries are selfish. I won't live that way anymore." To James, I said, "If you can't understand why excluding someone from celebrations while demanding their professional services is inappropriate and hurtful, then we have fundamentally different values about respect and relationship." Finally, looking at all three of them, I said, "I hope Dad continues to recover fully, and I hope someday you understand that healthy families don't operate through manipulation and conditional love. When you're ready to treat me like a daughter and sister rather than a medical consultant, you know how to reach me." The weeks following the meditation garden confrontation brought a period of grief and adjustment that felt like mourning the death of relationships that had never actually existed in healthy forms. I'd lost my family, but I'd also lost the fantasy of family relationships based on mutual love and respect rather than utility and convenience. The silence from Mom, Michelle, and James was complete and immediate, confirming that they'd chosen access to my medical expertise over authentic relationship with me as a person. They made no attempts to apologize for the birthday party exclusion, no efforts to understand my professional boundaries, no gestures toward building healthier family dynamics based on inclusion and respect. Their silence revealed that the relationships I'd been fighting to preserve had been one-sided all along, with me providing emotional labor, professional services, and family loyalty while receiving manipulation, conditional acceptance, and systematic exclusion in return. Dad called me twice during those first weeks, conversations that were both heartbreaking and healing as we navigated our relationship without the interference and manipulation of other family members. He was genuinely confused about the conflict that had erupted around his birthday party and medical care, having been shielded from the full extent of my exclusion and the inappropriate demands for my professional services. When I explained what had really happened with the party planning and the pressure to provide medical assistance despite being excluded from celebration, he was quiet for a long time before saying, "Zoe, I had no idea they'd planned my party without including you. And I never wanted you to compromise your professional ethics to help with my medication situation." His response confirmed that the manipulation and boundary violations had been orchestrated by Mom Michelle and James without his knowledge or consent, using his genuine love for me as leverage to pressure me into compliance with their unreasonable demands. Those conversations with Dad also revealed the possibility of maintaining a healthy relationship with him despite the complete breakdown of relationships with other family members. He respected my decision to establish boundaries around medical services, understanding that treating family members created ethical complications and legal risks that weren't worth the potential benefits. He was hurt that I'd been excluded from his birthday celebration, expressing genuine disappointment that his milestone party had been planned and executed without including his youngest daughter. Most importantly, he validated my right to protect myself from manipulation and conditional love, even when that protection meant stepping away from family relationships that had become toxic and unsustainable. Our phone calls became weekly rituals where we talked about his recovery progress, my residency experiences, and our individual relationships with other family members, without pressure to reconcile or return to dysfunctional patterns. The absence of family drama and manipulation created space for me to recognize how much emotional energy I'd been expending on managing their expectations, absorbing their guilt trips, and providing professional services that compromised my boundaries and integrity. My residency performance improved dramatically once I wasn't fielding constant family medical consultations and emergency calls that pulled my attention away from my official patients and responsibilities. My relationship with Daniel deepened as we no longer had to navigate the stress and conflict created by my family's manipulation and boundary violations. I began attending a support group for adult children of narcissistic families, connecting with others who'd experienced similar patterns of conditional love, exploitation of professional achievements, and systematic exclusion disguised as family dynamics. 6 months after the meditation garden confrontation, I received a phone call that would test everything I'd learned about boundaries, self-protection, and the difference between healthy reconciliation and toxic reunion. It was Michelle, her voice carefully modulated to sound contrite and vulnerable, calling to inform me that Mom had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer and was requesting my help navigating treatment options and medical decision-making. The timing and presentation of her request revealed immediately that nothing fundamental had changed about their approach to family relationships or their understanding of my value beyond medical usefulness. They'd made no efforts to repair the damage from Dad's birthday party exclusion, no attempts to acknowledge the inappropriate nature of their previous demands for medical services, no gestures toward building healthier family dynamics based on mutual respect and inclusion. Instead, they were using Mom's cancer diagnosis as leverage to pressure me back into the family consultant role they'd been missing since I'd established boundaries. Michelle's phone call included all the manipulation techniques I'd learned to recognize through therapy and support group participation. She emphasized Mom's vulnerability and fear about the cancer diagnosis, describing her emotional distress and medical confusion in detail designed to trigger my caregiver instincts and professional obligations. She mentioned how much Mom missed me and regretted the misunderstandings that had led to our estrangement, carefully avoiding any specific acknowledgement of their birthday party exclusion or inappropriate medical demands. She suggested that Mom's cancer was an opportunity for family reconciliation and healing, framing potential reconciliation as a gift I could give to a sick family member rather than something that required genuine change and accountability from people who'd hurt me. Most significantly, she presented detailed information about Mom's diagnosis, staging and treatment options, clearly expecting me to provide immediate medical guidance and consultation despite our 6 months of no contact. But the most revealing aspect of Michelle's call was her assumption that Mom's medical crisis would automatically override my boundaries and force me back into the family system regardless of whether any underlying issues had been addressed or resolved. She seemed genuinely confident that I would drop everything to provide medical support for Mom's cancer treatment, as if serious illness created an exemption from healthy relationship dynamics and appropriate professional boundaries. When I expressed sympathy for Mom's diagnosis, but explained that I couldn't provide medical consultation without first addressing the relationship issues that had led to our estrangement, Michelle sounded shocked and said, "Zoe, this is cancer we're talking about. Surely you're not going to let personal disagreements prevent you from helping Mom when she really needs your expertise." The response revealed that she still viewed my boundaries as petty personal preferences rather than professional necessities and emotional protection, still expected me to provide medical services regardless of how I'd been treated as a daughter and sister. I spent several days consulting with my therapist, support group members, and professional mentors about how to handle mom's cancer diagnosis while maintaining the boundaries that had protected my well-being and integrity over the previous 6 months. The consensus was clear. Serious illness doesn't erase dysfunctional family patterns or create obligations to provide professional services to people who'd systematically excluded and manipulated me. Compassion for mom's diagnosis didn't require me to return to the family consultant role that had compromised my professional ethics and emotional health. I could express sympathy and support for her cancer treatment while maintaining boundaries about my involvement in medical decision-making and care coordination. Most importantly, any potential reconciliation needed to be based on genuine acknowledgement of previous harm and commitment to healthier relationship dynamics, rather than temporary cooperation during medical crisis, followed by return to previous patterns once the emergency passed. I called Michelle back and delivered a response that felt both compassionate and protective. "I'm sorry to hear about mom's cancer diagnosis, and I hope she receives excellent treatment and recovers completely. However, I can't provide medical consultation or decision-making support without first addressing the relationship issues that led to our estrangement 6 months ago. If mom is interested in genuine reconciliation, that includes acknowledging what happened with dad's birthday party and working toward healthier family dynamics, I'm open to those conversations. But I won't return to providing medical services for family members who exclude me from family relationships." Michelle's reaction was immediate and predictable, accusing me of being cruel and heartless for abandoning mom during cancer treatment, using emotional blackmail and guilt techniques that had become familiar weapons in their manipulation arsenal. The months of mom's cancer treatment became a period of observation and learning that revealed everything I needed to know about my family's capacity for genuine change versus their commitment to maintaining dysfunctional patterns even during serious medical crisis. They made no attempts to address the birthday party exclusion or acknowledge the inappropriate nature of their previous medical demands, instead focusing entirely on my refusal to provide professional services during mom's illness. They recruited extended family members to pressure me into reconciliation, sharing selective information about my abandonment of mom during cancer treatment while omitting details about their exclusionary and manipulative behaviors that had created our estrangement. They even had dad call to request my involvement in mom's care, using his genuine concern for his wife as leverage to pressure me back into the family system despite our previous conversations about boundaries and respect. But the most revealing development during mom's treatment was their discovery that they could navigate cancer care perfectly well without my medical expertise, accessing excellent oncologists, support groups, and resources through proper medical channels rather than relying on inappropriate family consultation. Mom received outstanding treatment at OHSU's Cancer Center, surrounded by qualified professionals who provided far better medical guidance than I could have offered as a family member with emergency medicine training rather than oncology expertise. Their previous insistence that my medical involvement was essential for dad's cardiac care and mom's cancer treatment had been manipulation rather than genuine medical necessity, designed to maintain their access to my professional services while avoiding the relationship changes that would have required genuine respect and inclusion. A year after the meditation garden confrontation, I received a wedding invitation that served as the final test of whether my family had learned anything about inclusion, respect, and healthy relationship dynamics during our period of estrangement. Michelle was getting married to her longtime boyfriend, and the invitation was addressed only to me, without including Daniel despite our 6-year relationship and his presence at previous family events when my medical expertise wasn't required. The exclusion of Daniel from the wedding invitation revealed that they still didn't respect my partnership or understand that healthy family relationships required acknowledging and including the people who mattered to their family members. They wanted me to attend Michelle's wedding as evidence that our family relationships had returned to normal, but they weren't willing to extend basic courtesy and inclusion to my life partner who'd provided me with emotional support during their manipulation and boundary violations. The wedding invitation also included a handwritten note from Michelle that attempted to address our estrangement without acknowledging any specific wrongdoing or committing to genuine relationship changes. She wrote, "Zoe, I know we've had some difficult times over the past year, but family is forever, and I hope we can put our differences behind us for this special day. It would mean so much to me to have my sister there when I get married." The note was carefully crafted to frame our estrangement as mutual differences rather than their systematic exclusion and manipulation. positioning my attendance at her wedding as a gift to her, rather than something that required genuine reconciliation and accountability. Most significantly, the note made no mention of the birthday party exclusion, the inappropriate medical demands, or any commitment to treating me with greater respect and inclusion in future family interactions. I declined the wedding invitation with a response that felt both loving and protective. Michelle, I'm happy that you're marrying someone who makes you feel loved and supported. However, I can't attend your wedding while our relationship issues remain unaddressed, and Daniel's exclusion from the invitation confirms that the family dynamics that created our problems haven't changed. When you're ready to have honest conversations about respect, inclusion, and healthy boundaries, I'm open to rebuilding our relationship. Until then, I wish you happiness and hope your wedding day is everything you've dreamed of. The response allowed me to express genuine good wishes for her marriage, while maintaining boundaries about participation in family events that continued the patterns of exclusion and conditional acceptance that had created our estrangement. The 2 years since establishing boundaries with my family have brought a mixture of grief and relief that continues to evolve as I build my life around relationships based on mutual respect, unconditional love, and genuine support rather than utility and convenience. I graduated from my emergency medicine residency with honors, secured a fellowship position in wilderness medicine that combines my passion for healthcare with opportunities for travel and adventure, and began planning the life Daniel and I had envisioned during those golden years of building our relationship. We got engaged on the anniversary of Dad's heart attack, not because the date held negative associations, but because it had become a reminder of our commitment to protecting each other from manipulation and supporting each other's growth and integrity even when that protection required difficult choices and painful losses. Dad and I maintained our weekly phone calls throughout the period of family estrangement, developing a relationship that was deeper and more authentic than anything we'd shared when filtered through other family members' expectations and manipulation. He attended my residency graduation ceremony with Daniel's family, sitting in the audience while my mother and siblings chose to maintain their pattern of conditional support by staying away rather than celebrating my achievement without being able to access my professional services. His presence at my graduation felt like validation that love doesn't require manipulation, that family relationships can exist without exploitation, and that some people are capable of genuine pride and support even when they can't control or benefit from your accomplishments. Most significantly, the absence of family drama and manipulation has allowed me to understand what healthy relationships actually feel like and to appreciate the people in my life who love me unconditionally, rather than contingently. Daniel's family welcomed me completely once they understood the toxic dynamics I'd been navigating with my own relatives, offering the kind of inclusion and celebration I'd been seeking from my family of origin without realizing it wasn't normal to have to earn belonging through professional services and crisis management. My colleagues in emergency medicine became a chosen family of people who respected my professional boundaries while also caring about my personal well-being, celebrating my achievements without expecting personal benefit, and supporting my growth without trying to control my choices. Looking back on the birthday party exclusion and the family crisis that followed, I can see that losing my family of origin was actually the catalyst for finding my real family among people who love me for who I am rather than what I can provide for them. The pain of recognizing their conditional love and systematic manipulation was devastating, but it was also liberating in ways I couldn't have anticipated during the worst moments of conflict and confrontation. I learned that I'm worthy of inclusion and respect without having to earn it through achievement or service, that professional boundaries exist to protect both patients and providers from inappropriate relationships and conflicting interests, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their dysfunction even when that refusal costs you relationships you've treasured despite their toxicity. If you're watching this video because you recognize patterns of conditional love, professional exploitation, or systematic exclusion in your own family relationships, I want you to know that you're not crazy for feeling hurt by treatment that others dismiss as normal family dynamics. Your medical degree, legal training, artistic talents, financial success, or any other achievements don't create obligations to provide free services to family members who don't treat you with basic respect and inclusion. You have the right to establish boundaries that protect your professional integrity, emotional well-being, and personal relationships, even when those boundaries disappoint or anger family members who've grown accustomed to accessing your expertise without reciprocating love and support. The most important lesson I learned through this painful process is that real family, whether biological or chosen, celebrates your successes without expecting personal benefit, supports your growth without trying to control your choices, and includes you in important moments without requiring you to earn belonging through service or crisis management. If your family only values you when they need something from you, excludes you from celebrations while expecting your professional help, or uses guilt and manipulation to override your clearly stated boundaries, those aren't misunderstandings or communication problems that can be resolved through better explanation or increased effort on your part. Those are patterns of conditional love and systematic exploitation that require fundamental changes in their behavior, not adjustments in your boundaries or expectations. I encourage anyone dealing with similar family dynamics to seek support from qualified therapists, professional organizations that provide guidance about treating family members, and support groups for adult children of narcissistic or manipulative families. You don't have to navigate these complex relationship issues alone, and you don't have to choose between maintaining family connections and protecting your professional integrity and emotional health. Sometimes establishing firm boundaries leads to healthier relationships based on mutual respect, and sometimes it leads to the end of relationships that were never healthy in the first place. Both outcomes, while painful in different ways, are better than continuing to accept conditional love, professional exploitation, and systematic exclusion in exchange for belonging to a family that doesn't actually value you as a complete person. Professional achievements should enhance your life and expand your opportunities to help others, not create obligations to provide free services to people who don't treat you with basic dignity and consideration. Medical training, legal expertise, artistic talents, and any other specialized knowledge belong to you, not to family members who expect access without offering respect in return. You have the right to choose when, how, and for whom you use your professional skills, and healthy family members will support those choices rather than attempting to override them through guilt, manipulation, or emotional blackmail. Most importantly, you deserve relationships characterized by mutual love, genuine celebration of your achievements, inclusion in important moments, and respect for your boundaries and autonomy. If your current family relationships don't meet those standards, you have the right to seek those qualities in chosen family, friend groups, professional communities, and romantic partnerships that honor your full humanity rather than reducing you to your utility and convenience. The people who truly love you will want you to protect yourself from exploitation and manipulation, even when that protection requires difficult conversations and painful boundary setting that changes the dynamics of long-standing relationships. I'm grateful for the pain that led me to understand the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between family members who celebrate you and family members who use you, between relationships that support your growth and relationships that exploit your achievements. The birthday party exclusion was devastating, but it was also the catalyst for building a life based on genuine love, mutual respect, and authentic connection, rather than obligation, manipulation, and conditional acceptance. If you're facing similar choices about professional boundaries, family loyalty, and self-protection, I hope my story helps you understand that choosing yourself isn't selfish, establishing boundaries isn't cruel, and sometimes losing toxic relationships is the only way to make space for healthy ones. Thank you for watching and allowing me to share this deeply personal story about family boundaries and the courage required to value yourself enough to demand respectful treatment from the people who claim to love you. If this resonates with your own experiences, please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. Your stories and support mean everything to those of us who've had to make difficult choices about family relationships and professional integrity. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more about building healthy boundaries, recognizing manipulation tactics, and creating chosen family among people who love you unconditionally, rather than contingently. Remember that you're worthy of love, respect, and inclusion exactly as you are, not because of what you can provide for others, but because of your inherent value as a human being deserving of dignity and consideration.